Hi there, thank you for joining us. You're watching OBN Horn of Africa. This is Future Africa Show. Today we're going to discuss about the US hypocrisy and the Westerners' media warfare. I joined by Mikhail Gamandiy, a Russian journalist, and he is here to vote on the ongoing situation in Ethiopia, about the US interference, about the corporate oligarchies, media warfare, and their hypocrisies as well. Mikhail Gamandiy, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Mr. Eddy. Thank you very much for the invitation.
You are a journalist, and often journalists know what's going on across the world. It might be about natural hazard, about coup attempt. It can be about war. It can be any catastrophe. And what do you know about Ethiopian situation these days? Because you're a journalist, one way or another, you always hunt for news and you search what's going on across the globe.
Thank you, Mr. Aziz, for your question. Well, for sure, Ethiopia today is under a neo-colonial pressure. This is an evidence today. We can see that several countries are trying to put a huge pressure, political, diplomatical, security pressure on the Ethiopian state, on the Ethiopian people, on the Ethiopian government. Actually, it's not something surprising, because when we know the policy of the countries who are actually doing so, and including today with Ethiopia, I think it's not a surprise. I think there is several reasons which we have to mention about why Ethiopia today is under this pressure. I think, well, first of all, let's speak about history, because it's always important to remind some history. For sure, I mean, Ethiopian people know about it, but I think some foreigners may not know about it. Ethiopia is the only country in history who was never colonized. Yes, several countries tried. We remember Italy tried to colonize Ethiopia, but they never succeed. So Ethiopia, historically speaking, has remained the only African nation who was never colonized. And by the way, as a Russian speaking, because as you know, I'm a Russian citizen, I think it's important to mention something like the friendship between our countries started not only in the 20th century during the Soviet Union times, the Cold War and so on, but during that period, because when since the first war between Ethiopia and Italy, the Russian emperor has sent support to the Emperor Menelik II to support the fight, the resistance against the Italians. I think this is just something, it's important to remind that our friendship has a long way history. Except the historical aspect, it's important to also say why Ethiopia is a strategic country in Africa and even on the international affairs, because demographically speaking, Ethiopia is the second largest country in Africa in terms of population. This is also something we should not forget. It's an important thing today, especially when the West always like to refer to so-called international community. But the real international community is not the West. This is something we need to really take in our mind, because a minority of the earth cannot speak under the name of the whole community. When we talk about the international community, it's so many countries. It's China, Russia, Ethiopia, Latin American countries, African countries, Middle East countries. So one small group of countries cannot talk on the name of the whole world. This is just something unacceptable, especially today, as we are living now in a multipolar world. This is another thing which I think it's important to mention. And of course, the other reason why Ethiopia today is under aggression, because it's an aggression, it's because Ethiopia has a free sovereign policy, and including on its own internal affairs, on regional affairs, Pan-African affairs, and we should not forget when we talk about Africa that the headquarters of the African Union is an Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, right? And of course, also when we talk about such relations between Ethiopia and such a powerful country like China or Russia, who are major powers today in the world's policy, of course, this is also something the Western establishment, maybe not, of course, I would not put all the Western people inside. I'm talking about the Western establishment. They really don't like that. They don't like the fact that such an important African country like Ethiopia is defending its own independent sovereign policy, including in its relations with other countries which the West consider as its adversaries, including China and Russia. This is also the reason why Ethiopia is under attack now. Of course, we can also mention the economical aspect, because we know that Ethiopia is living a big economical development since long years. I was in Ethiopia quite long ago, but it was in 2014. And already at that time, I saw a lot of things, a lot of constructions going on in Ethiopian territory, in the capital, but also outside of the capital. And I know that after this time, because it was 7 years ago, I know, according to the friends I have in Ethiopia and other people who know Ethiopia, that a lot of other things were developed by this time. There is a real industrialization going on in Ethiopia. And of course, all those aspects, if we take them together, this can explain why the West, and including such countries like United States, are attacking Ethiopian state today within different way, but it's an aggression, and this is very clear to any objective observer.
The involvement of America is breaching the red line and trying to rescue TPLF, right? As a journalist, what do you know about the ongoing situation, and what do you know about the cause of this clash, and how do you see the involvement of the United States of America in striving to rescue this rebel group?
Well, I think there is several things to say about that. First of all, I think Ethiopia, as a free, independent, and sovereign state, has the right, the full right, to take the necessary actions to protect the security of its citizens, of its independence and sovereignty. Ethiopia is a free country, and I think nobody can, from outside of the Ethiopian borders, dictate to Ethiopia, to the Ethiopian people, to the Ethiopian authorities, how they should manage an interior situation. This is one point that I think it's important to mention. The other point, which I think also is important to mention, by responding to what you have said, of course, we can see there is a real manipulation of the situation in the Tigray province by the United States. As I said previously, those Washington and other of its Western allies, they are not happy that Ethiopia is not under their rule. Because, of course, during the 90s, they really put in their own mind that Ethiopia as a country is under their influence, forgetting to the fact that Ethiopia actually doesn't have to be under nobody influence, because Ethiopia is just a free, proud African state. And Ethiopia has the right to develop its own interior policy according to the interest of the Ethiopian people and the authorities who have been chosen by the Ethiopian people, and also to develop any foreign relation, alliance, whatever it is, economical, security, insecurity, in any area, according to its own interest. Of course, this is something the Western policy, the Western main politicians cannot accept. And that's why today we can see they are manipulating those so-called rebels by giving them a diplomatical and political support, trying to bring this issue to the Security Council of the United Nations. We can see that the West again, because Ethiopia is just another example. They have tried with other countries in the past, and they will try it with other countries in the future. They are just trying to bring this affair in the Security Council, but I think Ethiopia so far can count on the support of the China and Russia, who are also permanent members of the Security Council, who are blocking those neocolonial attempts to interfere in the internal affairs of the Ethiopian state. So I think this security issue which exists on the Ethiopian land has to be resolved by the security forces of the Ethiopia, by the sovereign decisions of the Ethiopian state, especially as we know that what the Ethiopian state has decided to do until now, we can see that there is a large popular support from the Ethiopian population. And this is also something important. So when someone talk about human rights, legacy, democracy, and so on, they should, first of all, respect the choice of the majority of the people who are part of the land which we are talking about. So they have to ask the opinion of the Ethiopian citizens. And not, it's because the future of Ethiopia, whatever province we are talking about, whatever region we are talking about, this is something Ethiopian people are the only one to decide, according to their sovereignty. Not someone can dictate what Ethiopian people has to do, the way they has to do. Washington or London or any other Western capital doesn't have any legitimacy to do so. I think this is something we have to mention. And I'm sure Ethiopia will manage this crisis in the best of its possibility. And I think Ethiopia can also count on the support of its African and non-African allies. I think this is this is what we have to mention about it.
According to the US, all the blessings go to the TPLF, whereas they curse the incumbent administration. As a journalist, what do you know about the incumbent regime and the current regime of Ethiopia with that of the ousted TPLF? Can you put in comparison?
Well, if I have understand well the question, I believe that the actual authorities of Ethiopia has a large support from the local Ethiopian from the local population, and I believe that the old regime, who has a lot of support from the United States, by the way, I don't think they were having the same kind of popularity among the Ethiopian citizens, as far as I know. Of course, I am a foreign observer, but as far as from what I have heard from my various Ethiopian friends who are living in Ethiopia, by the way, I think this is the case. I think the today government and the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has really a large popularity in his country, and by the way, not only in his country. And I think his wish to build peaceful relations with in the region with the neighbors has contributed to the fact that he was elected in 2019. He obtained the Nobel Prize of Peace. I think this is also something we have to mention. And I think it's very hypocritical, by the way. It's a real hypocrisy from the West, because at this time when the West thinking Ethiopia was still having kind of good or okay relations with the West, they were talking good about the Ethiopian government. But since they saw that Ethiopia is defending its sovereignty to the end, and Ethiopia is choosing strategic relations with other powers who are not Western countries and who are not Western powers, then we saw right away in the Western media, I saw it clearly, but basically not only in the English-speaking media, but also in the French-speaking media, because I'm Russian, but my main working language in the media is French, and I know very well the French speaking medias. This the same. So a few years ago, they were talking nicely about the Ethiopian government or neutral, and today we can see how they are attacking the same government of Ethiopia, how they are attacking the leadership of Ethiopia. So of course, when we see that and when we compare that, this is a real hypocritical approach, and that's why as I already said again, we can clearly see that there is a manipulation behind those who are fighting the governmental Ethiopian forces. We can see by whom they are manipulated and how the Western powers are trying to use this issue to their own geopolitical and geo-economical interest. This is something very clear from me.
Do you think that the alignment between the East, China and Russia with Ethiopia agitated America? Do you think that?
Yes, I'm sure about it. I'm very sure about it, especially that, of course, if we talk about relations between Ethiopia and China, those relations started long years ago. We saw that, for example, a lot of Ethiopian infrastructure built in Ethiopia were built by Chinese, with the participation of the Chinese interest, of the Chinese companies. So this is something which was not new. With Russia, we know that since the end of the Soviet Union, the relation was still good between the people, historically speaking, culturally speaking, and in terms of a lot of things, spiritually speaking. But of course, the relation went a little bit down. And now when we see the recent developments between the two countries, especially in the military security field, with the new agreement which are now started between the Ethiopia and Russia, which give a new, which is basically opening a new page, I hope so, between the two countries who were strong allies some dozens years ago. And today we can see that there is a clear wish between the two countries to redevelop, to make strong again this alliance, including in the military and security field. Of course, this is something which definitely make angry the West. This is something very clear because their wish was to take, the problem is not the fact that there is different countries working with Ethiopia. Actually, if the West was capable to accept a clean concurrence, a clean competition, I think everyone would be able to work and propose the best knowledge, the best services each country has. But the Western policy is not working like that. They want to dictate and to control the countries where they have a presence. And Ethiopia is not an exception on it. They want to be the rulers in the Ethiopian affairs. They want to decide how Ethiopia should build its policy and with whom she should sign or not sign strategic agreements. So with China, they were already unhappy, but they were thinking maybe they will be able to disrupt it somehow. But now when the relations with Russia and Ethiopia are coming again to a very interesting situation, then of course it adds an additional level of history, because this is history, to the Western policy, including in the United States. Of course, the good ties which exist between Addis Ababa and Beijing and Moscow is really making unhappy the Washington policy decision makers. This is something very clear.
The U.S. always prefer to assign a puppet leader in African countries, in most African countries, and they have been doing that for millennia as well. When it comes to Prime Minister Abiy, he is not a kind of yes man. You know what I mean?
I think, except the fact that Mr. Abiy Ahmed is choosing freely his international partners, African partners or non-African partners, I think the main problem is not only that. The main policy is to have this ability to build a free policy, which West doesn't like. They hate that. Because actually the difference between Russia and China is that Russia and China want to have partners with whom there is a with whom there is a mutual interest. But Russia and China will not dictate to their allies, to their partners, how they should build their policy, how they should, which kind of decisions they should take on the internal affairs, on the regional affairs, continental affairs, and so on. But Washington, this is the way of thinking they have. And this is, like you rightly mentioned, it's not something new. This is something which is happening for dozens of years, really dozens of years. We know exactly how they are thinking, and we saw the result of their intervention, so-called humanitarian intervention in the various parts of the world, including in Africa, basically. And Mr. Abiy Ahmed, the way he is guilty, so-called guilty, for the West and for United States particularly, it's not only his good relations with Russia and China, and not only the fact that he had, and also, as I said, their main reason why he's under attack today is that he has his own independent Pan-African approach. And this is a really problem for the West. And besides that, which I think this is also an important point, besides that he has this free Pan-African approach on the regional and continental Pan-African affairs, besides that, what is a real problem for the Western establishment is that he's really popular among his people, among the Ethiopian citizens. I know that he's a really popular person, politician. And of course, today, that is one of the reasons why the instruments of the so-called colored revolution are not working in Ethiopia. Because in some countries, they have used those instruments of the so-called colored revolutions and by using a minority, but an active minority. But in Ethiopia, they can see clearly that they cannot do that, because we can see over the last weeks and the last months how many people were mobilized in Ethiopia to oppose this Western approach, this Western hypocrisy, and to support the action of the government. And I think this is another reason why they cannot succeed in their destabilization, and that's why their level of angriness and of history is going up and up. This is another reason, because of this independent approach and because of the national popular support from the Ethiopian people. I think this is just adding more and more stress for the Western establishment.
The TPLF is a terrorist element, and which is labeled as a rebel group by Ethiopian parliament. why the US failed to denounce and curse this entity?
Well, I think for a very simple reason, because they need some kind of local agents who will participate in their destabilization plan, who should force, in their expectation, the Ethiopian government to go back to negotiations, to negotiate with them, and indirectly to accept the Western conditions, the US conditions. This is what they are doing. And also, once again, this is not some kind of new instrument they are applying for Ethiopia. We saw it in various countries when they use some kind of terrorists or so-called rebels, bandits, criminals, in order to achieve their geopolitical missions, their geopolitical goals. That's the goal for them today, to force the Ethiopian government to accept the conditions they want the Ethiopian government to accept, to force the Ethiopian government to negotiate, and after that, they will be able to, that's what they expect. They want to make the Ethiopian authorities to listen for the dictates that they want to impose to Ethiopia. But once again, knowing the Ethiopian capacity of resistance, interiorly speaking, in terms of interior mobilization, and also knowing the influence that Ethiopia has on the regional and the continental affairs, without forgetting once again the support of the two powers, which are China and Russia, including in the Security Council of the United Nations, I think Ethiopia will be able to resist. I'm sure about it. So I think this plan will not be successful for the West. For the last years, we can observe that all those destabilization plans are not working so well as they were working some 10, 15 years ago. Yes, some 10, 15 years ago, the Western destabilization plans were bringing success to them. But the last few years, in the new multipolar world we are living now, which is promoting strongly by China, by Russia, by other major non-Western powers and their allies in different places of the world. In this new multipolar world, they have to accept that the dictatorship is finished. They cannot anymore use it to control and to force countries to accept their dictatorship. I think this is something.
The US always use aid exchange for regime change, which is really funny. And these days, the US government under Biden administration is yelling about humanitarian crisis in Ethiopia. And how do you see this? They always intervene in sovereign nations' affair by talking about human rights violation, human rights crisis, and about destruction of sort of something. You know what I mean? How do you see this? Does this work out? And what should America learn from its failure in Afghanistan?
Yes, you are very right to mention the failure in Afghanistan, but I think the failure their failure is not limited only to Afghanistan. You are very right to mention this point about so-called human rights, because they always use this point of democracy, freedom, human rights to interfere in other countries' internal affairs. And what is very hypocritical from their side is that they are ready to overthrow democratically elected government supported by a large amount of people, because we saw it in Latin American countries so many times. Let's go back to the history. What happened, for example, some days in Chile? They overthrew a democratical government to put a dictator, and they did it also in other countries, including in Africa. When we talk about Africa, let's remember what they did to a big African leader as Patrice Lumumba, this Congolese symbol of the Congolese independence and African independence. How they killed him, in which barbaric and criminal way. And they have no regret until now. They have supported the apartheid government in South Africa, the racist apartheid government for so many years, to block the pro-socialist government. We remember all that. This is Cold War. But this mentality has never changed today. The last 15, 20 years has shown to us that they have kept exactly the same mentality. They are ready to support the worst criminal dictators and overthrow democratic leaders so far if those leaders are not entering to their geopolitical interest. So all this discussion, all this speech about democracy, human rights, this is just a cover to advance their neocolonial appetites, neocolonial crimes, and neo-colonial intervention. That's what they are trying to do in Ethiopia also. But once again, as I said previously, in Ethiopia, they will really have a hard time to do because Ethiopian people were never colonized. They know how to resist. Ethiopian people are ready to mobilize. We saw it for the last weeks and months how Ethiopian people were massively organizing the mobilization in the capital and in other places of Ethiopia. Ethiopia can count on the strong international support from major powers who are ready to counter this Western policy. And another thing which I also mentioned previously is that the Ethiopian authorities were democratically elected. They are not dictators. They were democratically chosen by the Ethiopian people. And I'm sure the Ethiopian people will defend their democratical choice by all means. And that's why I'm sure the failure will also be in Ethiopia, as it was in so many countries and as it will be in other places of the world. I'm sure about it.
Okay, appreciated. Mikhail Gamandiy, Russian journalist. Thank you for talking to Future Africa and thank you for your expertise, sir.
Thank you very much.
Dear viewers, this brings you the end of our edition for today. See you next time with another edition. Bye-bye. Have a wonderful time.